Hello, friends, and welcome to the Medicine Stories podcast. I'm your host, Amber Magnolia Hill, and today's guest is Sophia Rose. Sophia is a clinically trained and magically minded herbalist, folk healer, writer, teacher, and the creator and medicine maker behind Abeja Herbs. She was born and raised in Texas, and after years residing in Colorado and New Mexico, and living on the road for a time in a badass truck and RV situation she put together, she's currently rooted back in her hometown of Austin, Texas. I first met Sophia in 2015 at the Spirit Weavers gathering where we were both teaching about herbalism, but we had been connected online on Instagram for a while before that. Sophia has this big, beautiful, very tall indigo teepee tent that she teaches in when she travels, and such a beautiful space and container to learn from her and to have circles of women sitting around in. Sophia just brings this beauty everywhere she goes, this very intentional and heartfelt approach to the world, to the plant realm, to teaching and connecting with other humans, and that comes through in this interview and in everything she does. So remember I told you in the first episode that this podcast would not be perfect. We definitely had some sound issues recording this, but my editor did a really good job cleaning them up. But unfortunately, the first few minutes was cut out. That was by me. That was fully my mistake. So we just kind of get right into the first question without like hellos or anything. But we had said our hellos. Sounds a little weird, but just so you know that. I want to thank Sophia also for introducing me to the .love domain name. Her new project, which we talk about at the end of this episode, is Garden Party, and it's at gardenparty.love. It's a really cool thing that she's got going on there. And this all came to my attention when I was just changing my name from Aquarian Dawn to Mythic Medicine, and mythicmedicine.com had been taken. And I didn't want to reach out to the people who were using it. They weren't even using it. It reroutes somewhere else. So I looked at all the various other .somethings I could do. Didn't want to do .net, didn't really want to do .anything else, but .love just really, what else would I want, The 2-year anniversary of my mom's death is in a few days, and I just watched a dear friend die. She passed a few days ago, online and through Skype and through the phone. I got to witness her passing, and I actually recorded with her less than a week before she died, so that episode will be coming out soon. It's just profound and so beautiful. But what really has come through during this time for me, reflecting on my mom's life and her death, and reflecting on my friend Carrie's death, is just that love is everything. And I know it's easy to be flippant about that word and kind of roll your eyes and, .love, but there's just no word I would rather have be part of my name. mythicmedicine.love, gardenparty.love. In the end, love is all you need. To quote one of my mom's favorite songs, the song that I sing to my little daughter Nixie now when I'm changing her diaper and she's freaking out and fussy, and I just start going into all you need is love, and it usually calms her right down. So some of the things that Sophia and I talk about in this episode are the archetypal energy of Datura or Moonflower. It's a plant that I don't know, and Sophia taught me so much about it. I'm really looking forward to receiving her Datura flower essence in the mail soon. Working with smoke medicine and the thoughts around using the word smudge and smudging. The concept of the last ancestor who had a whole heart. I really, really love this. The idea that your name is your first lesson, and how when we work with plant medicine, we really are doing that so that we can become the medicine. That idea just kind of struck me to my core and makes so much sense, and is just a truth that you find as you walk the medicine path, whatever that means for you, herbalism or whatever you're doing. So Sophia, yeah, she's amazing, and I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. I'm sure she will be a recurring guest on the show. So let's get right into my conversation with Sophia Rose. So I've seen you write a lot about Datura or Moonflower, and I know that it's a really powerful plant, but I don't have a relationship with her myself at all. I don't think I've ever met that plant in real life. Can you tell us a little bit about her medicine and the archetypal energy that you see with her?
Absolutely. It's really interesting to me that you have yet to meet Datura because you are someone that I consider to so embody a similar archetype. And to me, Datura is a plant that helps us to see the fine line that exists between life and death, between this world and the other world. And I only use Datura as a flower essence and very occasionally in external preparations. Datura is in the nightshade family, the Solanaceae, and as such, she has incredibly potent physical medicine that I do not recommend anybody experiment with or take unless they have been properly initiated within their ancestral lineage. In flower essence form, though, she is totally safe because, as I know you know, flower essences don't contain any physical constituents of the plants that they're made from. They're purely energetic. And Datura is a plant that I work with as a flower essence for helping to give death to things in our life that are long overdue for it. We can have such a strong attachment to things out of fear or out of societal conditioning to be nice. And often the most kind thing we can do is to let go of something or someone when it's past time to do so. So Datura flower essence can be used both internally and externally. I grow the plant in my yard, and she grows wild in Texas and in New Mexico and Arizona and in Southern California, which are all places I spend a lot of time. And she blooms at night. And you want to be really careful if you're handling Datura because her medicine can enter your bloodstream through the skin. And so even if you're harvesting a flower for a flower essence or the leaves for an external preparation, you want to be really, really cognizant of not having too much physical contact with her. But I personally think that each of us has plants that live within our inner landscape and that we are kind of holographic representations of, and we are them and they are us, because while we each try and fit ourselves into these tiny little human bodies, we are so vast and we are so multidimensional. And that's why I love plants, because plants are these incredible multidimensional beings that are able to come through into this world as flowers and leaves and roots, but they inhabit all of these other realms as well. And so in that way, I really feel like I'm often drawn to other people who are embodying that plant, and those people are really drawn to me as well. And just recently, an old friend of mine who I have a very, very deep soul connection with wrote to me and told me he had a dream that I was giving him Datura flower essence, and just explained the whole experience. And I was like, great, I'll mail you some. And I mailed it to him, and he's like, that is exactly what the bottle looked like. So Datura is also a plant that I think has a really incredible and unique ability, perhaps more so than other plants, to traverse into the dream world as well.
Well, that was my next question. So let's get into that. Do you have a specific dreaming practice, a way to work with the images and the wisdom that comes to you through the dream realm?
This is something I really would like to develop in my own life more. The way that I work with my dreams is often to write them down, which is a really common practice that pretty much any dream worker will encourage you to do. And that's because it helps you just incredibly to be able to transport yourself back to that space, because the same area of the brain that we use to write is the same area of the brain that helps with dream recall. So I've had a practice lately, just even in the last month, of doing what's called morning pages, which I'm sure you've heard of. And it's a practice from the book, The Artist's Way, which I admittedly haven't actually read. But essentially, it's just a practice of writing 3 pages longhand first thing when you wake up. And for me, that often does include writing down my dreams. And someone I've learned a lot about dream work from is a mutual friend of ours, Asia Suler. And something I really like that she suggested is that you actually type up your dreams, and then you can like search for words that are commonly used. And so I've yet to do that, but often when I'm learning about a plant, I'll bring it into my dream space. And so whether that means drinking a tea of the plant before I go to bed, or burning its smoke around my bed, placing it under my pillow, or taking a bath with it before I go to bed, these are all ways that when paired with intention, you can really bring through that multidimensional plant wisdom through the dream space. And I particularly have been working with plants a lot as smoke medicine lately, which is something I can touch on later. But smoke communicates with the subconscious mind, I would say, almost more powerfully than any other form of plant medicine. And it immediately shifts our nervous systems into a parasympathetic state of relaxation. So as I've been getting to know these different bioregional plant smokes more intimately, bringing them into my bed space and into the dream space has been really powerful. And it's also something I like to recommend to people who suffer from traumatic dreams or from nightmares, because that smoke is incredibly protective, and it creates a container for you to do shadow work in a safe space in your dreams.
And you were talking about smoking the plants, right? Not smudging.
I'm sorry?
You're talking about smoking the plants, right? Not smudging.
No, I am talking about smudging. I sometimes abstain from using that word, and I just use the word smoke medicine. There's really not a great word that is not appropriated from another culture to describe the practice of working with smoke medicines.
Yeah.
But yeah, smudging is a word that derives from the Native American tradition of working with smoke medicines, and that is exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I like that a lot better. I never like saying the word smudging, and I never really thought about that.
We need to come up with a new word.
Yeah, smoke medicine is great. And yeah, once I started making that a practice, see, now I don't want to say smudging, burning plants and inhaling their smoke and having them in my space, I was just amazed at how quickly it resets. Like you just said, it's just like stressful day, feeling overwhelmed, anything going wrong, I just burn a little mugwort leaf or something, and I'm just reset so quickly. It was a really powerful form of medicine.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get back to Datura. It sounds like that she's like a liminal space holder.
Absolutely.
And I believe you said something about you feel this crone energy from her.
She almost transcends the archetypes of maiden, mother, and crone, because she's a being who's so beyond life and death. And in some ways, of course, that can be associated with the crone, because the crone is sort of on that edge between life and death, depending on what stage she is in her journey as a crone. But the wisdom of the crone understands that life is not as it seems, and that things which on the surface may appear good may not be. Things which on the surface may appear bad may not be. So Datura really helps us to get in touch with that sort of more than human ability to see beyond our limited self-interest and see beyond the idea of like personal life and personal interest to the interest of the entire bioregion or community or earth organism, and understanding life and death as two sides of the same coin and the necessity of death to feed life. It's something that I think about a lot and inhabit a lot. And in some ways, I hold this perspective that I guess it is deeply human, but because of the culture that we live in some ways it seems not human to not prioritize human life or my own life over the life of a plant or an animal, and to see each part as integral. And that's not to say that that I don't take the resources that I need to feed my own life, because that is a part of what it means to be on this planet. It takes life to create life. It takes death to create life. But just that I can understand, for example, when there's a mushroom growing on a tree and it's eating the heartwood of the tree, I don't see that as sad. I see that as life generating for the larger ecosystem that both of those organisms are a part of.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about that word this morning, the word sad, and how whenever we announce death or an illness, it's sadly so-and-so passed away today. And of course it is sad, or unfortunately. And I don't want to disparage or take away from the sad feelings that people are feeling, but we only view death as a negative thing in our culture. There is no deeper understanding of what you're speaking of, the regenerative force within. And so, I mean, wow, Datura just sounds like a necessary medicine for these times.
Absolutely. She helps us to see the wide arcs of time that extend so beyond our lifetimes or our children's lifetimes, or, even many generations down our bloodline. She helps us to see deep earth time and to be in service to the life with a capital L, so to speak.
So has working with Datura or any other kind of medicine in your life, herbal or not, helped you process the grief of the recent loss of your friend who you were telling me about?
Yeah. I want to say again, keep talking into the mic.
Yeah, okay, I am. I'm like hunched over.
I can hear you now.
Okay.
I don't know what the difference is, but whatever you're doing now is working.
Okay, thank you. It's just like the difference of a couple centimeters, but thank you.
That sounds really challenging. Yeah, so can I go ahead and answer the question?
Yes, please say anything that you would like to about this experience and this beautiful soul.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation to speak about the passing of my friend. So about 2 months ago, a very close friend and fellow herbalist of mine ended their life. And my reaction, of course, was shock and grief and, wishing they said goodbye. And it was a really, really intense experience for me personally to lose them, because I've actually never lost a friend. And this particular person was someone that I'd known since the very beginning of herb school, actually. So I'd known them about like 6 or 7 years. And when I had been quite sick a year previous to their passing, they had actually saved my life. And they did so by driving like 4 hours from where we were in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night to go and get the medication that ultimately literally saved my life when I was having an acute kidney infection. And I was really on the threshold between life and death at that time. I was like talking to my ancestors, and I was delirious, and I was in a very tenuous position, and they were the one that went and got me what I needed to come back to this world. And so when they passed, it felt very karmic between us. And I believe that when someone that we love and that we have a close connection with makes the transition into the other world, we have a sacred responsibility to grieve them. And also to take care of ourselves. I think the thing that shocked and scared me the most about that experience was how thin the thread that was holding me to this world became. And I think a lot of that comes from our culture not understanding how to grieve or how to process death or how to honor death. And I personally went into a state where I literally felt like I was dying. And like I was being pulled into the other world. And it became very, very difficult to eat. Like impossible to eat, actually. And all of the things that keep us in this world became very difficult to do. And I'm not trained or initiated in any tradition of helping anyone to pass over. But very intuitively, I knew that there were certain things that I had to do. And the first thing I did is I had a fire. And I had been planning to send this friend of mine juniper branches for them to make incense out of. And I had harvested the juniper and I was getting ready to send it to them. And instead, I made a fire with the juniper. And as the smoke was rising, I was just praying, and I could feel their spirit, and I was praying for them to make a safe passage to the other world, and praying that they would be relieved of the suffering that they were experiencing while they were living and when they were embodied. And the communication that I started to receive from them after their passing really radically changed my idea of what death is. Because it's very easy to conceptually understand that we don't die when we leave our bodies, but to actually experience a connection that feels not alive in the same way, but alive in just as meaningful of a way with someone who has passed over as when they were embodied, radically shifted my perception of what it means to leave your body. Because I felt them there with me, and I felt and feel that now that they are no longer on this plane, that they can do the work that they had been longing to do all along in a way that is much more effective, and that they can still they can still bring through the medicine in this way. And yeah, after they passed, I learned about it the day afterward, and the day before when they had ended their life, I had taken this walk, and I had just walked to this place, this really random spot in my neighborhood, and almost as if I was a marionette, like I just sat down at this really, really random place on the sidewalk or on the side of the road, like on this curb. And I just sat there, and I'd had a really stressful day. And the feeling of peace that came over me while I was sitting there in retrospect is like almost like nothing I've ever experienced before. I just was almost thoughtless, and I was looking at the clouds and just sitting there. And then in the same way that I had sat down without thinking, I just stood up and I walked over to some plants that were nearby me, and I started to notice them and just admire them. And the plant was coleus, and it was coleus surrounded by marigolds. And coleus is a plant I had never felt a connection to or been drawn to, but in that moment I was just like very present with this plant. And in speaking to a mutual friend of ours later, because we were talking about like how we had planted some plants to honor them, she mentioned that that was one of their favorite plants, and I hadn't known that. And so I really feel like in some way I was able to be with them as they were passing. And you know, I don't know how the time correlates exactly, but that experience was so singular and so unusual. And I really think that it's so important to let ourselves be moved in that way, in a place from beyond the mind, just listening to where we're meant to be. And that's, you know, it was really powerful to be with the coleus, of course, as like a plant that they loved and perhaps like that they were embodied in. And then the marigolds, which are a traditional herb to honor those who've passed over. So.
Can you spell coleus?
Let me Google that real quick. I think I can, but you never know. Yeah, it's just how it sounds. It's Coleus, and it's a plant that comes in a lot of different colors, but basically it's like kind of bright green and almost magenta, and then in the fall it turns totally magenta and red, and it's a really striking plant. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to speak all of that.
Yeah. Sharing our stories around grief, it's just so necessary, right? We have to speak about it. It does not do us any favors when it stays inside. And I found as time goes on, I can just share the same stories over and over. Stories like that, you know, it's actually bringing up a story for me that I'm wanting to speak, which was, I think 6 years ago now. A dear friend drowned, and he was in Colombia at the time. He had just gotten up and gone without telling anyone. The whole thing was mysterious. And his family bought my family's house when my parents divorced when I was 25 and sold the house. And our family had been the first family to live in it. And so only our two families had ever lived in this house. And he moved into my bedroom. And so I just always felt this deep connection with him, with David, and with their whole family for being the only other people who occupied this space that was so important in my growing up. It's still the most recurring dream I have, is that I'm in my childhood home, lived in there from the day I was born till I left home at 18. And so when he died, I went up to Tahoe, South Lake Tahoe, where I was from, for another funeral. I had missed his because of the snow. It was wintertime thing. And as my mom and I left this other funeral, I was like, we have to go see David's mom. We have to go to our house. And so we did, and I got to connect with his mom, which was really beautiful. And then I just had this overwhelming feeling that I had to go outside. And so I told my mom and his mom, I'm just going to go spend some time alone outside. And as soon as I walked out, it was like just this overwhelming sense of home and this place and this land that I had known so well. I had walked on that front porch so many times. And I walked around the side of the house that's kind of like the weirder side that no one ever spent time on, because that's where we had the big wood pile for the wood stove. And just being back in this landscape of my childhood was so overwhelming. And I started hysterically crying, like snot falling out of my nose, and I could barely breathe. And I was just shaking and shaking and shaking. And I kept walking out to the backyard where I've just spent thousands of hours in my childhood summertime, and in the snowbanks in the wintertime too. And I went to this big Jeffrey pine tree that had been right next to our swing set when we were kids, and just hugged it. Just like fell into that tree, sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And then I walked out into the middle of the backyard and looked up at the stars, and this peace came over me like I have never felt before. And it was just, everything's okay. And like, David knows that I loved him, and he loves me too. And he's still here. And I walked back up the other side of the house, did a full lap, went back inside, and I was just like brand new. You know, I was floating. I was happy. Got to have such a deeply connective conversation with his mom, and it was so healing. And it just speaks to that, the need to grieve and to listen to your intuitive longings and what you want to go toward in your time of grief. So thank you for sharing your story. And I'm so sorry that you lost your friend. And I love what you have to say about that the relationship remains when someone has passed. It just changes. And you get to know this person in this much bigger form, their bigger form, their vastness, their whole soul shining forth without the impediments of the physical body that can be so binding and restricting. Yeah, I've really felt that since my mom passed. And I love hearing from other people when they have the same experience. So, are you hearing me well?
It's still kind of spotty, but I understood everything you said. It's just sort of in and out.
Okay.
But I'm right here with you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to honor you for going into that deep space with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Datura. And I want to...
And she was actually... I want to say one more thing about Datura.
Please.
Datura was actually an ally that I shared with my friend who I was speaking about. And it was her medicine that brought us together in the first place. Because I think when we met all those years ago, actually at Ghost Ranch in Abiquiu, at the first year ever of Kiva and Wolf's Conference of Many Names. You know, we were both really young, and somehow we started talking about Datura and our mutual connection to Datura, and just had to keep talking about it, and went on this long walk through this arroyo, just excitedly speaking about her. And when they were younger, they told me they would literally sneak out of their house and go and sit beneath a huge Datura plant at this construction site, I think they said. And I don't know. I just love that idea of like a teenager sneaking out to go see a plant because I totally get that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I really want to meet this plant. And she's so beautiful. The photos that you've shared too, just a
Mm,
gorgeous creature.
yeah. Well, I will send you her essence.
Oh, I would love that. Thank you. Can we agree though that the Good Medicine Confluence is like the best name? And
I
that
think they're all good names. They've all been good names.
but traditions and Western herbalism is like a little dry, you know? I think the Good
Hmm.
Medicine Confluence, I love how it flows and good medicine.
Confluence. It's a nice word.
It's a great word. It's a word that we use a lot around here because of the Yuba River and American River confluences.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned that you have two strong ancestral connections. And I was really intrigued because one of them was with your great grandmother who you knew as a
Hmm.
child, and one of them is with a more distant ancestor who you did not know. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, I would love to hear the stories individually or together, or how those relationships, compare and contrast being so far removed in time from you.
Well, first, I want to thank you for being someone who's really inspired me to pay more attention to the stories of my family and my ancestors, and for really being a beautiful example of someone who honors their lineage, because that's been really powerful for me to witness. Um, Lately, I've been loving getting to hear more stories about my more recent ancestors, I suppose, and just to learn more about my family history. And for most of us, unfortunately, that is so largely missing. And if we don't have a context for where we came from, then we have no way of knowing where we're going or where we even are. And it's something that happens, I think, in our subconscious mind. I am recalling right now a story that my father was telling me just last week. I almost never see my father, but he was in town and he was fixing my front door. And as he was fixing my front door, I was exhausted and I was like collapsed on my couch. And I was happily listening to him tell me about my great great grandparents. And my family on my father's side has lived in Mexico for a couple of generations, but I didn't understand actually how far that went back, because we're not Mexican. We're not from that part of the world as far as where my family is indigenous to. But it was really interesting to me to just even get to understand, like, wow, like my family has had a deep relationship with that part of the world for a long time, much longer than I realized. And I think it goes back, I guess, to my great 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 grandparents. So circling back, I just wanted to mention that because even having that little bit of information, I can sense what it does to the neural pathways in my brain that tell me that I come from somewhere, that I belong somewhere.
Yeah, I really feel like ancestry is one of the most powerful medicine stories that each of us have access to.
And it's something that I am just barely scratching the surface of in my own life. But as you mentioned, I do have a palpable connection with my great grandmother, whose name was Malka. Her birth name was Malka Schluger. And when she moved is sort of a funny word, but when she came to this country when she was 16, she immediately changed her name to Mildred. And similarly, my great grandfather, his name was Herschel Lasnovsky. And when he moved to this country, he immediately became Philip Hirsch. And so just hearing those words on your tongue, the real names that where you came from, I think it's really powerful. So my great grandmother, Malka, is someone that I did know when I was a child. I think she passed when I was maybe like between 6 and 8. I can't quite remember, but I did know her. And Actually, the first year that I was at the Spirit Weavers gathering where you and I know each other from, I was in Paola's cacao ceremony, which was an incredibly potent medicine experience for me. Maybe one of the most powerful ceremonies I've ever been in, sitting and drinking cacao and singing and praying. And as you wander out of the redwood grove where the ceremonies were held, there was the ancestor temple or ancestor altar. I don't know exactly what we were calling it, but there was this large redwood that was hollowed out and filled with photos and mementos of people's loved ones who'd passed on. And I, very similar to how I was just drawn to this one place during Avon's passing, I just kind of wandered in there and found myself standing in this redwood, and all of a sudden was just kneeling on the ground with my forehead to the earth, just crying. And I felt her presence there so strongly. And I started to understand some of the fears that I had, some of the fears that I carry that are so deep in me. And we inherit so much from our ancestors, both near and distant. And a lot of our ancestors endured a lot of trauma. And even though those wounds are not our own, they live inside of us and they live in our psyches and in our cells. And so in that moment, as I was kneeling on the earth inside of this incredible ancestor tree, I started to just have this context and also this immense compassion for myself and for her, for all that she endured in her lifetime and for the ways that it was trying to be worked out in my life now. And after that, I was able to speak to some of these fears that I have with more kindness and again, more context, just to understand, like, that was her life, that isn't my life. That fear that I have of having to flee, of having to leave everything, of losing everything in an instant, those are her fears, not mine. And in some ways, I've lived those fears out in sort of interesting ways throughout my life, because I think we, every generation, we like to think we're so different from our parents, and in many ways each of us is. And that's what life is, like, life with a capital L, so to speak. That's what life is all about, is continually, like, evolving, so to speak. And but I think we carry a lot more than we often realize. And when we can look at our mothers and our grandmothers and our great grandmothers and back into deep time and really behold all of those women or all of those ancestors with immense compassion and immense respect, we can start to live our own lives with more grace and more presence and just a greater ability to navigate the challenges that are so old. Mm-hmm. And I want to speak also, you mentioned the ancestor that I have a connection with, which is like maybe even more in the spirit realm. I don't know, but the other ancestor I have a strong connection with is someone I've seen only in journey work and in visions, and she appears really consistently, which is why I thought to mention her to you when we connected about doing this interview, because she's a woman with fair skin like mine, and she has 2 long gray braids. She's very slender and very old, but she's very vital, and she's always dressed in all buckskin clothing, and she always has a red rose. And there's this idea of the last ancestor who had a whole heart in your lineage, the last shining one. And sometimes we have to go really, really far back.
What does that mean?
Well, the way that I think of that is, we are all we are all, and we have all for a long time been living in societal structures that don't support our humanity, for lack of a better word. And so I think a lot of our ancestors were struggling with similar things. And so we have to reach far back sometimes to find that person in our lineage who is still intact, so to speak, whose indigenous wisdom and indigenous soul was still intact. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know exactly of what you speak.
Yeah. And so to me, that's the woman I'm speaking of. And again, I've seen her in visions and in dreams and in journey work. And then I had a really, really trippy experience last month where I went to a workshop with a woman that I really like in Santa Fe, who is a shamanic psychotherapist who I've worked with in the past. And it was like a weekend long workshop where we were just journeying the whole time, basically. And there she was. There was this woman who I've like seen in my visions in the workshop. And I was like, do I tell her? Like, this is kind of weird. Like, do I tell her that she looks just like this ancestor of mine? And, you know, because it's like, you don't want to project that onto somebody. But it was a really, really interesting experience to see someone who is like almost identical to the person you've seen in your visions in real life out of context.
Yeah. Did you tell her?
I did. I told her, and you know, we actually ended up having a lot of medicine for one another because she had a similar experience, deep loss in her life, and this was right after I lost my friend, and so we ended up getting to share a moment of tenderness and grief, and spoke of her daughter who had ended her life and my friend who had ended their life. And I was able to give her a bottle of my rose petal elixir. So, you know, there's medicine there, and she and I may reconnect again. So we'll see.
Yeah, that brings up another question that I wasn't planning on asking, but I do like thinking about this with you. I like thinking about names and the meaning of our names and how those meanings can unfold over time. Like I hated the name Amber as a kid because other people had it and that angered me. And now I just love it, and it has so much meaning and so many layers of meaning. And your name, Sophia Rose, they're both really powerful names with these beautiful meanings in the greater culture. Sophia, the goddess of wisdom, and Rose, just the queen of the flowers. So do you feel in resonance with your names?
I love that question. And as you ask that, I'm remembering one of the first times you and I spent time together. We were sitting on a rock in the Yuba talking about our names. And you were explaining your middle name, Magnolia, to me as well. And that was just a really special moment. And yeah, I feel like my name is one of the greatest magical tools and gifts I've been given in this life. And I consider my name to be such an honor. Names are so powerful. And when I guess it was many years ago now, but a good friend of mine who I speak about a lot, her name is Olivia Pepper. She's a friend of mine here in Austin, and also someone I consider to be a teacher and a guide. And she gathered a group of women together, and she asked us all what our full name was and one project that we were working on that we wanted support around. And when we were all together, she explained that in many esoteric traditions or spiritual traditions, your name is your first lesson. Or often you're given a new name. That's your magical name. And so in that space, she's a master of history and linguistics and esoteric wisdom. And so she explained to each of us the deeper meaning of our names. And that was such an incredible gift for each of us. And it really was this initiation experience in some ways. And so to me, my name is, it's what I am, it's my work in the world. It's what I'm here to do. Sophia, as you said, refers to like the feminine aspect of divine wisdom and divine knowledge. And then Rose, as I understand it, points to the divine and esoteric wisdom, the subterranean wisdom of the earth. And going back to that, like sort of that archetype of Datura, like there's the rose, but there's also the thorns. And so there's this duality there as well. And so yeah, I really, really strongly identify with my name, and I love my name. And growing up, I was called Sophie. And around the time I was 16, I was like, nah, I'm Sophia. And then when I was, I think, 18 or 19, I decided to start using my middle name as well. And Sophia Rose is my first and middle name. And you know, it's really powerful. And whenever, you know, my family still calls me Sophie. You know, more than a decade later, they still call me Sophie, which is really hard because I feel really unseen, you know, because our name, it's our identity, and it's the way that people honor us by pronouncing our name correctly and by calling us by our chosen name. And a friend of mine who is trans pointed out to me recently that that was sort of similar to them misgendering me. Just like really not honoring who I identified as. And so sometimes, you know, obviously everyone makes mistakes, and it's very easy to call someone whose name is Sophia Sophie. But if someone does that casually or like in email or something, it always sort of puts a bad taste in my mouth because I feel like there's a really big difference. And to me, I identify Sophie with like who I was growing up and who, you know, all of like the little girl parts of us that like maybe I have a lot of work to do still to welcome in and to love. So
yeah,
that too.
they feel like such different names, and it's just that one syllable, that one sound at the end makes such a difference.
Yeah.
I remember that conversation at the Yuba River on the Rock, and we had just met like the month before at the Spirit Weavers gathering. And I remember saying to you that I feel like, yeah, Rose is just the perfect moniker for you because you really embody this beautiful balance of softness and strength. You're just exude such beauty and have this real, like, sensually open and perceptive and intentional way of moving through the world and sharing with the world. But there's also a discernment in there, like those thorns, you know, you're letting the right stuff in and keeping the other stuff out. There's a strength. It's not just like a collapsing inward softness. It's a perfectly structured strength in the softness. And I just see that in you so much and have learned a lot from it. And so it's just lovely that you were gifted with the name Rose.
Thank you, Amber. Your reflection, I'm just taking it into my body right now. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Sophia. So just one final question. I want to leave our listeners with a little more taste of who you are and what you do online. You're this incredible teacher with a big online presence, a beautiful Instagram feed under the name La Abeja Herbs, and wonderful newsletters that just, you know, drink in the wisdom of them whenever they come into my inbox. And now you have this whole new project going, so much more coming from Sophia that I'm really excited about. I loved looking through the website last night, Garden Party, and I'd like to hear more what your vision for it is and what it's all about.
Thank you for the invitation to speak about Garden Party. Yeah, so I started La Abeja Herbs 6 years ago, and every single new and full moon for the last 6 years, that's every 2 weeks for the last 6 years, I have sent out a newsletter, which you mentioned.
That is crazy. Okay. I do one like every 2 months and I'm like, this is so hard.
Well, all of your newsletters are just delightful, and your voice comes through so clear, and your humor and just your warmth and all of it. And I love getting your newsletters as well. And also, yeah, it's a little crazy that it's probably the most consistent thing I've literally ever done in my life. And yeah, it's definitely one of those sacred purpose kind of things, because I don't have that kind of willpower on my own. Definitely the divine was using me as its vehicle to get those things out. But essentially through Abeja Herbs, 6 years ago, I set out, after graduating from herb school, and I did three things at the beginning of the business. I taught, I saw clients, and I made medicines. And then of course, like, sent out the newsletters, which was sort of a part of all of it. And over the years, the focus has shifted from teaching to products to clients at different times. And in recent years, though, it's mostly been focused on the medicines that I make and sell, both online and in stores across the country. However, I continued to write these newsletters, and they continued to get more complex and, just more filled with story medicine, as you've mentioned so many times. And it occurred to me that, we work with plant medicine really intensely so that we can become the medicine. And I just had this very palpable realization of that when I was in Southern California a few weeks ago. Like, I was sitting and soaking in some water, and I had just had a really challenging conversation with someone where I was kind of embodying Datura, and it just occurred to me, like, you work with plant medicine so that you can become that wisdom. And so basically, it was suggested to me that I start doing a paid newsletter for people who wanted, more resources and just more opportunities to learn. And it wasn't something I was capable of doing unless it was a paid resource, because it takes, a lot of time and energy. And I love to devote myself in that way to those things. But of course, each of us only has so many hours in the day. And the other thing that I really wanted to be able to do was to donate a lot of that money back to organizations that I felt were doing really good work at the intersection of environmental and social justice. So that's how the idea for Garden Party was born, was just essentially that I was going to I'll start a paid newsletter. But as with most ideas, as you and I spoke about earlier, with your idea to do this podcast, there's so much complexity that we couldn't anticipate that often comes into these projects. And so I very quickly realized that Garden Party was its own thing. It was not just a paid newsletter through Abeja Herbs. It was its own thing that wanted to be given birth to. And so right now, what Garden Party is, it's in its second month. We launched in October and had a really fantastic party in Joshua Tree where I led a plant walk, and we had tarot and tea and tattoos and tintype, and we had my favorite mezcal company, Gem and Bolt, come and pour mezcal, and it was just lovely. And we had sound healing. I could just go on and on. So we had the launch party, and I sent out the first missive. And so these missives have recipes and playlists and monographs that go in depth into the medicine of some of my favorite allies. They have herbal formulas, and they also have video resources for learning about plant medicine. So, and then my favorite part of Garden Party, which I didn't expect, but which has been coming through, is that there's a daily practice that is something that I think is really powerful. And essentially, I'm more interested in Garden Party helping people to create their own relationship with the plants and place where they live, rather than just giving them information about different plants. Because when you cultivate the underlying worldview and ethos that allows you to connect with plant medicine in your own way, that is going to be so much more powerful than, reading every herb book in the world. And so these daily practices, they're things that may or may not be directly related to herbalism, but they're practices that help you to start to tune in to yourself and to where you are. So, for example, last month's daily practice was, and certainly much more poetically stated in Garden Party, but it was essentially inviting people to wake up to watch the sunrise every single day and to be present for that moment when the balance shifts from night to day. And yeah, so essentially it's a newsletter that goes out once a month, but then it's also a growing online resource where you can go and search the name of a plant that you want to learn more about. And as the resource grows, you'll find recipes and videos and all kinds of learning resources that are really, really beautifully laid out, easy to understand, and you know you can trust them. And then the final thing that Garden Party is that it's actually a party that happens every so often. And so it's going to be a gathering that will pop up in different bioregions just a few times a year, not that often. And it will highlight the plants that grow there, the people who are working with those plants. And really, my goal is to bring resources back into that community and to engage a community of people who may be curious about herbalism, but not otherwise feel that they have access to it, and to connect them more deeply with the people who are already doing the work in that area and also with the plants that grow there. And our next garden party is actually going to be in Austin, Texas, where I live and where I'm from. And it'll be on December 10th at this really, really special place called the Secret Theater. And it is shaping up to be a really epic day. I'm really excited about it. So
yeah, the video from the Joshua Tree gathering was just gorgeous.
Thank you, Amber.
I mean, like, I'm looking at the website right now, at the Garden Party website, and you invite people to go slow as they take this information in. You invite your subscribers to take it as they can. And I just want to say that, like, your aesthetic, the font you use, the spacing of the words, the way you write, the beautiful photos, it really does. It drops me into this slower place where I really can absorb it and connect with the information and then really integrate and utilize it in a way that I just am not going to on like a list of 10 uses for turmeric or something.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're really hitting on a big reason that I decided to do Garden Party as a monthly newsletter rather than to launch a whole online course, because I know for me, if I just get these little tidbits of information that feel like these precious jewels that I can truly integrate, that will have a much more powerful effect, at least for me and my learning style, than if I tried to dive into something that I may or may not actually have the ability to create time and space for with all the other things I have going on. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping it'll be really effective for people in that way by just giving them enough to digest and embody each month. And thanks for noticing my font also. I was wondering if you'd notice my font.
Always.
Yeah.
And the organizations that you're supporting are so rad too. The Indigenous Environmental Network, the Southern Poverty Law Center. I contribute a little bit to them every month. United Plant Savers and Native Seeds. That's rad.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a huge reason that I'm doing what I'm doing, because I want to be able to support these people who are doing incredibly, incredibly important work right now. And so every single Garden Party subscription helps to support those organizations. And, our ability to support them is only going to continue to grow. And that is so incredibly exciting to me.
Hell yeah, it is. All right, Sophia Rose, thank you for being you.
Thank you, Amber. I really have appreciated the opportunity to speak with you and hear your voice and sit and share some story medicine.
Yeah, we'll do it again.
And I'm so proud of you. Congratulations on your new show. I can't wait to listen to it while I fold my laundry and drive across the country and wash my dishes.
Yeah, I mean, that's why that's how I use podcasts, right? You can't always be sitting there with a phone in your hand or a book in your hand. It's just taking information in through audio is really my preferred method these days. And I'm so excited to be able to present medicine stories this way. So thank you. Thank you for taking these medicine stories in. I hope they inspire you to keep walking the mythic path of your own unfolding self. I love sharing information and will always put any relevant links in the show notes. You can find my blog, handmade herbal medicines, and a lot more at mythicmedicine.love. While you're there, be sure to click the black banner across the top of the page to take my quiz, Which Magical Herb is Your Spirit Plant? It's a fun and lighthearted quiz, but the results are really in-depth and designed to bring you into closer alignment with the medicine that you're in need of. If you love the show, please consider supporting my work at patreon.com/medicine stories. There's some cool rewards there, like exclusive content, free access to my herbal ebook and online course, and the ability to chat with me. I am a crazy, busy, and overwhelmed mom, and adding another project into my life with this podcast is a questionable move, but I'm also so excited about it and just praying that the Patreon will allow me the financial wiggle room to keep doing it. Another way that you can support, if that's not an option, is to head over to iTunes and subscribe and review the podcast. That would be super helpful. Thank you. And thank you to Marie Sue for providing the music that I use. That's Marie with 2 E's, Sioux. This is from her song Wild Eyes, one of my favorites. Check out Marie Sue. Beautiful music. Thank you, and I look forward to next time. Bye.